We are live now. Kinjal, you can go ahead, please. And
Yep,
start the.
1 second. Yes, so shall we begin if we, ma'am, if you permit, so shall we begin?
Sure, sure. Yeah, please.
Sure.
Let's
So,
begin.
okay, good morning, everyone. At SciComm Synapse, our mission is to bridge the gap between science and society by fostering conversations that makes research more accessible, engaging, and impactful. So, as a part of our vision, we are excited to present KalaTatva, our SciArt initiative that celebrates the intersection between science as well as art, showcasing how art can be a powerful medium to communicate complex science idea. Today, it is my distinct honor to introduce our guest, Dr. Ipsa Jain, a remarkable scientist turned science artist whose work beautifully transcends traditional boundaries and brings science to life through visual storytelling. Dr. Ipsa completed her BSc and MSc in zoology at the University of Delhi, followed by her PhD in molecular oncology at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where she explored cancer-related mechanisms such as cell migration and drug resistance. After her postdoctoral fellowship at INSTEM, she made a remarkable shift from pipettes to pencils, venturing into the world of science illustration and visual storytelling. Her creativity journey includes co-authoring and illustrating the acclaimed science book Actually Colors Speak, along with conducting numerous science art workshops and design making sessions across the institutions. Through her work, she has inspired countless students, educators, and science enthusiasts to see research in a new light. Dr. Ipsa truly exemplifies the powerful intersection of science and art, and we are today privileged to have her share her journey and insights with us today. Please join me to give a warm welcome to Dr. Ipsa Jain. Also, I welcome our dear audience to this exciting session. So, thank you so much, Dr. Ipsa, for being with us today. We are truly excited to learn from your journey. So, I think let's dive directly into the discussion. So, shall I begin with the questions, ma'am?
Yeah. I just want to thank you for inviting me and for that lovely introduction. I've never introduced myself so well. Yeah, please go ahead, Kinjal. Yeah.
Okay. So, ma'am, Dr. Ipsa, to begin with, could you please help us understand what SciArt really means? I mean, especially in the sense of science communication.
Right. So SciArt is a fairly nebulous space, and I think trying to give it a frame or a definition would be
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you. I think you are not audible. Can you please, increase
okay.
the volume of your mic?
Sure. Am I audible now?
Yeah. Can anybody confirm? Like Somalia, can you hear ma'am clearly? Okay, ma'am, you may continue.
Okay, hi. Sure. What I was saying is that science art is a fairly nebulous space, and I think while it may it may need a distinction, but it probably doesn't need a frame or a definition. And when it comes to science communication, I think it's a very small space within the SciArt nebula because when we do science communication, it's more like a designed project. You know what you want to convey, you know what your audience is, you know what the audience's needs are. So what you are doing there is more science visualization and not so much science art. I mean, it is also science art, but I think science art can take many more forms, which are beyond scientific visualization or even science storytelling sometimes. Like just the idea of using visuals to convey something is not the only definition of sci art, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, so ma'am, that was really insightful as well as fascinating. It really puts into picture and the perspective how SciArt bridges this both worlds of science and art.
Yeah.
So, moving forward to the next question, could you please tell us which part of your own story resonates most deeply with your decision to bring in science and art together?
I mean, in terms of at the point in my life, during my PhD, I was during PhD towards the end of it, I was very convinced that I do not want to be an actively science researcher anymore, and I figured that my interest lies elsewhere, um, and at that point of time, I didn't enjoy writing as much as I do now, and I have always loved drawing, so it kind of made sense to start drawing again. And the reason that I decided to be in science communication was that there were experiences in life, particularly during PhD, where I had the opportunity to engage with audiences. So I was at IIC, and IIC has this annual event called Open Day, where all the students would put up exhibits and interactions to engage with the audience that's coming in, and we would have like large number of people coming in every year. And I really enjoyed interacting with people on that day, and then I formed kind of relationships with the audience in the way that they people would come back every year and look for me when they would come to the department and remember the interaction they had last year and so on. So there was something about connecting with people and sharing science with them that was really joyful. With respect to visualization, the story that comes to mind is during my bachelor's first year, one of my favorite teachers gave us this assignment to draw out development of eye. I think it was in frog or maybe some other organism. And I mean, I think the expectation was to kind of just copy the diagrams that they were in the book. But what I tried to do was I read the text in the book, and there were stages that were not visualized in the diagrams in the book, but were described in the text. So I created those intermediate stages as well in my assignment, and I got a 10 on 10 with the note perfect on that assignment. So I realized that, as a biologist, I do have a knack for visualizing processes, even if there is a text description um, available. Yeah. So that's something that I enjoyed. I mean, not just the reward of it, but the process of doing it was also something that was interesting for me.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That was truly inspiring. So, building on to that, I think we are very curious to know that
Yeah.
you were inclined towards art right from the very beginning, or did that interest evolve gradually during the course of your education and research?
Right. I mean, so I even when I was a young student in school, I did enjoy drawing very very much. After science, I think fine arts was my favorite subject, and my fine arts teacher was my favorite teacher. Um, but so there was in fact a point in time where I did contemplate that should I be pursuing art or should I be pursuing science. I mean, science did kind of took the weight over at that point in life. But then later in life, I realized that perhaps both can be practiced in parallel, in conjunction. And um, that realization happened more, not how to say intuitively or obviously, but more in response to the fact that I decided that academic research is not for me. Um, but and also what happens as a biology student in particular is that drawing is just very much a part of your academic journey as well. So even in bachelor's and master's, I remember drawing out specimens, microscopic observations, and all of that. So observational drawing and schematics and diagrams, all of that is very much part of how you study science. And I think the weight is particularly heavy in biology for visualization. So, it was part of education and practice, so to speak. And even during PhD, we all used to have these presentations that we would give annually or sometimes monthly within the lab or at other spaces. And I used to use the free drawing tool on PowerPoint and used to make illustrations for my presentations. And at some point people liked those so much that some of my peers or juniors or seniors would come and ask me, hey, can you draw this out for me? And I would. So even at that scale, visualization was part of things that I did. So it has continuously been part of education and research. Just translating that into a practice has taken some time.
Okay, so wow, thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
So further, we would love to know a little bit about your creative process. So when you begin a project, do you usually start with a scientific concept and then shape the art around it, or does an artistic vision take a lead to guide your work?
I mean, it can be both ways. See, but if let's say, if I'm collaborating with a scientist or I'm working in the lab, let's say, when we were looking at when we were making actually colors speak or something like that, then definitely two things come first. One is the science in and of itself, and then deciding who the audience is. So these are the two situations that we need to get right before we start planning and deciding what the output is going to be, what it's going to look like, what should be the tone, what should be the size, all kinds of things. Decisions happen much later. Science gets decided first. But in my own personal work, there are times when I feel like, okay, I want to experiment with collaging or I want to experiment with printmaking. So then sometimes the medium comes before uh, deciding what the content or what the science story is going to be in it. So when you're definitely working for an audience centric project, you have to start with science first. That just has to be the way, because you have to understand what kind of complexity can your audience understand. Like if you're doing a project for young students and you're doing a project for adults or you're doing a project for farmers, your approach can't be the same, even if the theme or the subject that you are speaking about is really the same. So in that context, um, you need to layer, you need to filter, you need to identify your story points, you need to identify the depth that you want to go into, you need to identify what medium is suitable. And so all of those decisions happen with both audience and content in mind. But when it's self-expression, then you can decide either way. I mean, even then, more or often than not, it often comes from deciding what I want to say. Um, Say, for example, making a zine. I'm thinking about a zine right now, which is has to do with this idea of where does multicellularity come from. So my starting point is some previous reading would have happened. That's why that idea is there in the head, and some reading is happening right now. And then at some point it will become a story, and when then story is developed, then I'll start thinking about how do I want to visualize it. And if it's a personal project like a zine, my style of visualization really depends on my mood. That okay, this time I feel like working with watercolor. This time I feel like working with digital drawing. This time I feel like working with collaging or whatever else that comes to mind. Um, but I think in a good science communication project, you really just have to start from science first. I think I've only seen, I mean, maybe in some science art projects, maybe you can start from art first. But in my personal practice, it's mostly science first.
Okay, so I think that was a very interesting perspective on the process. I see how it requires both patience as well as creativity. Thank you for sharing that. So, moving on to our next question. So since SciArt reaches diverse audiences, we would want to understand how you have observed any differences in how scientists respond to your work compared to the non-scientist community. And along with that, do collaborations with the researchers or fellow scientists, artists, influence your creative process in a positive way?
I'm not sure I follow the second part of the question clearly. I'll get back to that, but let me reflect on your first question. Uh, Both scientists and I mean, luckily, have had the opportunity to interact with non-scientists, where they're directly engaging with my work, and I see them also react to it with joy or inspiration or and best of it all, curiosity. So this was one of my first scenes where the visual was about drawings of a cell, and there was nucleus, there was mitochondria, and whatever else, and I was presenting it at a public forum called Indian Comics Fest in Bangalore, where you get to interact with your audience uh, in person. And I remember some of those, they'll look at it, and then suddenly I'll see that eye lit up, which is like their light bulb moment where they're understanding what it is that I'm trying to convey, and then or it's a shock like, oh, they didn't think about something this way. Um, uh, and they are sometimes even able to say, hey, I remember this structure, but I don't remember what it's called. And or some people may say, hey, I remember mitochondria, this is the powerhouse of the cell. So people are able to connect and find curiosity. When a scientist would interact with it, they might or might not experience that same curiosity because the familiarity with that subject might be higher. And in some cases they might still like find how do I say, interestingness, because the way it has been talked about or the way it has been presented is different from how they would experience it. So a lot of non-scientific audience and in fact scientific audience, one of the common feedback that I hear from people is, I wish the textbooks that we had growing up were either written this way or visualized this way or something like that. So that's a happy feedback for me. I wouldn't really think that these two audiences react differently, except in their familiarity of the subject matter. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you repeat your second question, and maybe I can try to understand where
Yes.
you're
So
coming.
the second question was, so do the collaboration with the researchers or
Hmm.
the fellow artist influence your work in a positive way, influence your creative process in a positive way?
I mean, I'm a pro collaboration person. I do a lot of independent work, but I love collaborations. I mean, not all of collaborations work well. Some of the collaborations while collaborating may go south, but I think the idea of different people, different perspective, and different ideas coming together in a project is always, always, always useful, because you will just see a perspective that you didn't think of earlier. I mean, it's a people interaction that sometimes doesn't work in a collaboration. But in terms of ideation, in terms of brainstorming, in terms of thinking through new ways, collaboration is always useful. And um, I would say that if you are working on something, don't keep it to yourself. Talk about it. Talk about it with either a familiar set of friends and sometimes even an unfamiliar set of people. Because I mean, this is true for both even science and for this kind of creative work. That talking about it and getting inputs from people is only going to enrich it. Um, and you may need to identify boundaries or roles in a collaboration if that's helpful. But some collaborations can be organic, some collaborations can be more systematically defined, that this is your role, this is my role, and we respect each other's boundaries, and we have a more formal mechanism for feedback. With some people it can be more organic, uh, depending on people interactions. But I think collaborations are always a good idea.
Okay. Okay, so thank you for those reflections.
Mm.
So I think creating visuals from complex scientific concepts is certainly no easy task.
Mm.
So, from your experience, what has been the most challenging aspect of translating abstract scientific ideas into visual forms that resonates with people?
Right. So one of the tightropes that one I feel that any scientific visualizer has to walk each time they work on a project is the balance between accuracy and clarity. Now, when you are visualizing any complex sort of process or structure or whatever you have, especially when you are also somebody who knows science and you're working with somebody who is deeply interested and passionate about the subject that you may be translating, if you're collaborating with a scientist or a researcher or someone like that. Now, so somehow we as scientists have this tendency or expectation that we want to declare all the nuances that there are. And somehow we expect each piece of text or each piece of image to be able to do all of it together, which I think is an unfair expectation on any science communication piece. So you have to identify and distill that these are my two or at max three core ideas that I'm communicating in this piece. Once, so that distillation sometimes takes time because the scientist or the researcher whose story you are communicating or translating has to agree or has to define these three core ideas that are the most important pieces to tell in this piece of work that you're making. Now, once that is agreed upon, then you have clarity on what are the parts that will make this clear to the audience. See, the other thing is that more often than not, images do happen in a context. Like images are not free floating. They have a title, they have a description. Sometimes they are part of text pieces. Sometimes, if you think of a comic, they have text in themselves. So they all have textual context. I mean, even if you think of just a diagram with labels and legend, there is a context in which the image exists. So you have to figure out that what is the context of this image or set of images that you are making. Then, given that context and those three ideas that you have identified, you have to decide very carefully what is the information that needs to be there and what is the information that can be removed. Because if you put in all the details that you might just make the messaging difficult, and the audience, the reader, the seer may find it hard to identify that message that you actually want to communicate, because there is a lot of noise, so to speak. There is a lot of information that is not needed to understand that message or that set of messages. So you have to actually do a lot of work to decide, okay, should I show the number of molecules correctly? Should I show the size of molecules correctly? Should I show the positions of molecules correctly? If you're doing, for example, drawing a molecular landscape, or I can just use visual annotations to describe these interactions. Which part of that, which aspects of that process are important to show and to be able to give the message that I'm conveying, and which can be taken some liberty with. So, so that's something that with each piece of work, the judgment can't be the same, because it will depend on the story, it'll depend on the context, and you are basically dialing in, dialing out, and there is no one formula, and you will only sort of find your balance of that clarity versus accuracy with trial and experimentation. And you may not always get it right. Even if you have done this for 10 years, you may not always get it right. And each one is an experiment. But of course, experience helps, because you've seen how your previous work has um, worked or not worked.
Okay. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I think that's really something to learn from.
Mm.
So now, if I may ask something on an imaginative note,
Mhm.
so if the resources are limited, and what would be your dream science art project look like?
Resources are limited or unlimited?
Are limited. Sorry, not unlimited. I'm sorry, unlimited.
What would my dream art project look like? I mean, I can't say I have a singular answer, because if you ask me this question today, my answer would be different. And if you ask this question maybe 3 months down the line, my answer would be different. But at the moment, I am very, very interested in working with paper as a material. I mean, because I also draw on paper, there is a certain familiarity that I have with paper. So I like the idea of making architectural books. And when I say architectural books, I mean things like pop-up, laser cuts. So something like that. And the idea would be to question form in space. So something that's large scale and brings together small forms to make a large form, or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me in 6 months or 3 months, maybe my answer would be different. But at the moment, I'm interested in experimenting with paper. Maybe. Um, okay, let me not do that. It's difficult to get things in focus. But yeah, I'm interested in layering paper and light, layering paper and sound, all or paper and light and shadows, things like that. Yeah.
That was a wonderful vision. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
So, moving on to our next question. So, since science art is a actively emerging field, it
Hmm.
naturally comes with both opportunities as well as challenges. So,
Hmm.
in your view, apart from its promising growth, do you see any significant drawbacks or limitations in this field?
I mean, I mean, this is a practical reality. It's that like only some of us will be able to make our livelihoods based on this. I mean, to be honest, even I don't make my livelihood from my science art or science illustration work. Um, so that's the reality, because the opportunities that pay and pay well or pay reasonably for this kind of work are far and few. Uh, but I mean, that has changed. I mean, since the time since I've started working, I'm seeing a lot of change. Um, and there are now a very few handful of science institutes that even have designers or illustrators in their science communication or outreach teams. Uh, but that's the difficult reality, and it may take some more time for that to change. And that's true even a little bit internationally. The number of people that are practicing versus number of people that are making their living from it is not really a good number at this point. So, if anyone here is interested in building that kind of career, I would really, suggest that you think through it a little bit. I mean, I can tell you that I have some privilege that, I mean, um, if I don't earn or work for some time, it's fine given the family situation. And uh, so you have to be honest about your reality and your needs, um, and then work accordingly. One suggestion would be to not feel dissuaded and figure out a way to diversify your income sources. And that's something that's possible, but you have to be strategic and, sort of planned about it. You can't expect miracles necessarily. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So that sounds like a real challenge, but also an opportunity to, I mean, innovate.
Yes,
Yes.
that.
So thank you for those candid thoughts. So further moving to the next question, which is shifting our focus to a Indian context. So how is science art being celebrated in India as a form of science communication? And how do you see it shaping in public understanding of science in the coming years?
The second question, really, to be honestly, it's very hard to answer that. I can't say I have really looked at measured responses from the audience with respect to visual. I mean, my only collection of responses is from um, a limited scientific community and a very, very small number of the large audience that we have in the, the other specialist audiences and people who are not necessarily from the science background. So, I would say that in terms of celebrating SciArt, I think there is a lot of space now. I mean, I started doing this almost 10 years ago or 9 years ago, and that time there were maybe two or three people who were trying to do it in the way that, and now there are at least 25 people, I would say, if not more. I can't say I know all of them. And There may be more that I'm actually not even aware of. And so that is a good thing to see. Natural history illustrations has always had a space in India. Then that's something that's been happening since the pre-independence era. And we also have a lot of artful contemporary natural history illustrators in India. So that's a rich history to look at if you want to think about science visualization in India. But the other kinds of visualizations that we are now seeing in modern times, which um, so, some of the people that you are bringing to these series might be doing. Um, so that space has only opened in the last decade. And it is received well. People are engaging with it, even if the monetary mechanisms are not in place to be able to pay well, but at least the interest and engagement is there. And some education also has happened, at least for some institutions, about how to engage with these kind of people, how to find value in visualization, and all of that has happened. But we need some more work, more time for um, to bring systematic change where appreciation becomes opportunity, and so that will take some more time. But definitely there is interest and engagement, no doubt about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you for shedding some light on an important facet of this field.
Yeah.
So, moving on to our last but important question, which is an advice for our young enthusiasts. So, for the young people who want to enter this field, what
Hmm.
baby steps or what are the starting points that you want to recommend?
Right. So first is that if you already draw, then that's great. If you don't draw or haven't done drawing in some time, would be to pick up some tools and start practicing. I know it's easy to feel like, okay, digital is great, but I would recommend starting with pencil on paper, um, just so that you develop some important eye-hand coordination skills and thinking skills, which I strongly believe is better on paper than on any of the digital tools. Um, you should, of course, try more tools and figure out what is the kind of tools that work for you. Maybe you are the kind of person who likes to draw on Illustrator. Maybe you are somebody who likes to paint on Photoshop. Or maybe you are someone who likes 3D and wants to do work on Blender. Or uh, or you like watercolor, or you like something else. I mean, whatever. So, I mean, you do have to experiment a little bit to find out um, the kind of media you prefer or you like to work with. um, I'm not consistent. I'm an experimentalist in that sense. I do whatever I feel like at that point in time. But I think it's good to have something that is your strength and you can consistently showcase that. Then the other thing would be to develop a portfolio. Now, portfolio should not be your 50 things you have done. It should be your curated portfolio that showcases your process, that showcases the kind of subjects that you're interested in, that showcases maybe the skills, the strength particularly that you have, and maybe some which are just some interest nodes. So I would say practice and developing a portfolio should be your first step. The next step would be maybe networking and reaching out to people and saying, hey, I'm trying to do this kind of work. Do you need something that I can do for you? And maybe some of your initial gigs can, in fact, be maybe low paying or a favor for a very dear friend, or a volunteer contribution to a larger community or something like that. Though I do not believe in unpaid work, but as a starting point, doing some personal projects or a project with a friend, or contributing to a larger community might not be a bad idea. That's how I started as well. And yeah, so I mean, and then one thing leads to another. It takes time, but I would say that these three are the steps that I would recommend that you should go in that particular order. Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you for sharing that with us. So,
Mm.
building on to one last question upon this. So many of our audiences really want to know that are there any current courses or any institute which teach or nurture science in India? And if yes, then what are the criteria to get an entry?
Right. So, as much as I know, there are no science visualization courses in India, but there are definitely illustration courses or graphic design courses in India in a lot of art and design schools. And different institutions have different requirements. Some of them are okay if you don't have, let's say if your bachelor's or master's is in science, so then you there are some places that will allow you to get into a master's for an illustration or graphic design program, even if your bachelor's is not in these fields, but you have to showcase portfolio. So you will still need to, even to be able to enter some of these schools that teach illustration and graphic design, you will need to develop some portfolio. I would recommend. So there is this program in Canada somewhere, which is called BSMS in biomedical visualization. On their website, it's directly written what do they look for in the portfolio. So they will talk about how they, want you to, let's say, look at your hand and a feet and draw it out. They want you to draw a process, let's say, tying a knot or something like that. There are some activities given in that program. I would say that can be a good starting point for you to sort of identify what kind of things you should have in your portfolio. And then you can, if you have done any science communication projects or any other kinds of projects, then you can add that. Or you can do a few, collaborate amongst yourselves or collaborate with another friend who may need a graphical abstract or who may need some drawings for their thesis or whatever it is that you can offer them based on your interest, and put that together. Yeah, I would say also look at places like Behance or um, some other platforms where people put up their portfolios, because then you start to understand how people present their portfolios. You don't need to do that for all of your projects, but at least one or two highlight projects you should definitely document really well. Document how you went about it, document why you did it, how you did it, some in progress shots, and the final version. So even portfolio presentation is kind of an art, and I think it's worth doing some research on how to build a portfolio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So thank you so much, Dr. Ipsa, for your responses. You have addressed. We really appreciate how you have addressed each of our questions with such clarity and thoughtfulness. So to help us dive even deeper into your work and experiences, may I now invite you to share your talk with us?
Okay, sure. Um, so, I mean, I don't really have a talk prepared, unfortunately, because I didn't realize that there was the expectation. I thought this was going to be a Q&A. But I will briefly describe my journey, the parts that perhaps haven't been touched in this conversation. Um, so, we have discussed that my early education was in zoology, where I did get to experience a lot of drawing and visualization as a part of my curriculum. I did do a grad studies in a cancer biology lab and realized very much that um, I do not necessarily seek a career in scientific research. So when I started my journey as an illustrator, so to speak, I started actually with natural history. I would draw some specimen a day, and I think for almost 2 months or 3 months, I think almost every day I made a drawing. And I created this Facebook page that I'm now cringe to look at, where I would share these drawings, however good or bad they were, because they were part of my journey in terms of sort of growing and becoming um, the person I am now, or the practitioner I am now. Um, what that led to sort of was an invitation to put up my work at one of the student festivals at IISc. It's called Pravega. So one of my friends from that UG group said, "Hey, do you want to come and put up your work?" And I said, "Okay, I'll put up my work, but can I also sell some postcards?" And so he said, "Sure." And I printed a few postcards, and um, I mean, I had zero expectations, but I think I made something like 4,000 bucks selling postcards for 50 bucks or something like that, which meant that I sold a lot of postcards. And I was shocked and surprised that people are willing to buy things like that. And that's when I first realized that there is perhaps um, possibility to, at least, I mean, if not earn a living, but make some money from this kind of practice. When I started doing this kind of illustration work, I wasn't necessarily looking at it as my career choice. It was just something I wanted to do. And and then I started getting requests from friends or other scientists that I knew to, let's say, draw posters and other kinds of merchandise for a conference, or draw schematics for their website. Um, and things like that. And so it was a bit of a struggle and a bit of an exploration. I also worked with this group called Stempiers, where I would manage the blogs. I would both write and invite people to write, and I would draw the banner images and all that. So all of those things added up and kind of allowed me to build a decent portfolio and also a reasonable network. And then it was by serendipity that I met Minaj, who eventually became my postdoctoral mentor. So we were at a conference in Pune, and I was just complaining to him that how India doesn't really offer opportunities or mechanisms for people like me to try out this kind of work. And the very next week, he gave me a call and said, "Do you want to come and join my lab?" And that's how I got my postdoctoral opportunity. And that was kind of really the big space where I got to explore different kinds of project. The book actually Colors Speak was one of the main projects we did there, where the idea was to communicate how and why animals change color for a young adult audience. And the idea was to make a picture book. That was an amazing learning experience. We learned how to tell stories, how to visualize science, how to keep it consistent, how to find a tone that works for the content and for the audience. So they were all learning opportunities. The some of the other projects that I did there were about like more academic kind of work, where I was visualizing how this protein looks and walks. We were working on some cytoskeleton proteins, if this audience understands cytoskeleton. And what we were able to do through that exercise, we were able to identify where the current hypothesis or understanding of the molecular motion or molecular structure do not sit well with each other. If the molecule looks like this, it can't possibly work like this, or if it's working like this, then it can't possibly look like this. So, which is now has been sorted out by new science that has since happened. So that was also interesting project of using drawing as a way of summarizing science and asking new kinds of questions or postulating hypotheses. The other thing that happened during that time was because of the postdoctoral fellowship and the kind of work that I was doing, I got a lot of opportunities to give workshops and sharing the kind of work that I was doing. And I think that was really useful because I realized that I really like sharing. And because in my understanding, and something that struck me that time and I still hold true, is that the moment you share what you learn also from participation from others. And I think it's a little bit silly to wait to become an expert before you start sharing, because no one ever really truly becomes an expert, because there is always more to learn and more to do. So you go with the humility that you are limited in what you know, but I'm happy to share what I know. This is a principle I still hold by and hold dear. And so those teaching opportunities were also useful in understanding that I like teaching and sharing as a space. And then I got to work on some really cool projects, like designing a lot of visuals for an online book by the biology department at Azim Premji University. I got to work on curating content for a museum that's going to come up in Gujarat. And then I worked there with the designers to sort of imagine and decide what kind of interactions or visualizations that should be there. Um, things then, and then the practice also changed from just merely illustrating to sort of thinking about science communication more deeply, or storytelling more deeply, because the idea of bringing the perspective of the audience and audience needs got added, the perspective of how to decide how much content to share, or how clear the messaging should be, or um, how much to tell. All of those kind of things added up. And then I also started looking at history of science visualization a little more, how do I say, critically slash academically. I don't know what's the right word to use here. And that understanding has also helped in the way I look at my work, or how my work has changed, from just merely being an illustrator to being a visualizer. I mean, the labels don't matter, but it's just how you look at what you are doing, and how do you continually continue to build on what you have done and improve the scope, and the learning that you can get from it, or the learning that your audience can get from it. And yeah, I mean, and then I've had the opportunity to teach students at an art and design school, which was also fabulous in and of itself, because I could talk about science in a design school, which is um, unusual, but exciting in its own way. I got them to work at the interface of science and society. We did some public facing projects where we invited people to engage with their own curiosities in public spaces. We got to make comics about history of science. We got to understand people's perceptions on trust, or people's perception on science, people's perception on biotechnology. So we did a lot of interesting stuff, which was all at the intersection of science and society. Because what is cool about working in an art and design school and not at a science school is that they're also your audience. So the curiosities they have, the questions they have, are kind of like similar to the questions that your audience would have. And so that's interesting. But then they also got to work on those problems as a designer and solve for it, so which was interesting to facilitate. Yeah, and since then, I mean, since always, I'm continuously doing my own SciArt practice, which is making zines. And right now, I'm working on quite a few. I hope that in the next few months, you will see, if you keep track, of more science art zines coming together. Most of them are at the intersection of science and society. I'm particularly obsessed with how scientists do things that they do, or why do they do things that they do, and how that relates to building trust in science for people outside of the sciences. So some of that work will come out in the coming few months. I'm kind of excited about that. Yeah, and if anyone wants to find me, my website is called ipsawonders.com, and some of my work is also on Instagram, again under the same name, Ipsa Wonders. So you can find me and you can look me up. If you have any more questions or from the audience or something, I'm happy to answer. Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you so much for such an insightful and inspiring thought. I am sure the audience must want to is eager to engage. So, we can directly move to the audience question and answer session.
Hmm.
So, if any of the audiences they have any question, please raise your hand, or either you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, so we have you two questions.
Hmm.
So I will be reading them out then. So ma'am, the very first question is from Shreya Maheshwari. So she asks that what would you recommend from an art point of view, engaging with trying out all different media forms, or just perfecting a certain type of art style? Does switching between art styles help in any way?
I think that has to be a more personal decision depending on the kind of person you are. For example, I'm an experimentalist. I keep on trying seasonally. One year it'll be watercolor, one year it'll be ink, or one year it might just be charcoal sticks or something like that. Or so I have been told that when people look at my work, they can tell that it's by Ipsa, but they I can't tell. How do people know that it's by me? So you do end up developing your own voice or style in a way, even if you are not medium consistent. But if you're starting out, I would say that definitely do something at least consistently, because it just practice does strengthen some neuronal circuits, so to speak. Um, Even if you diversify later, start with one and then diversify. So like I started with pencil and watercolor, like those were my initial sort of um, training in school, and then now I feel confident in trying out other things. What Where diversification is definitely important is in being able to work with some digital tools, especially when you're working with scientists and preparing something like graphical abstract or something. You will definitely be it'll definitely be needed that you can work with some digital tool. Sometimes you can take your hand done things to digital spaces. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it may just require uh, specific digital tool. I mean, not specific digital tool, but some digital tools. So after some practice with pencil, working with some digital tool is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, ma'am, next question we have is that, in your opinion, what is better in respect of pursuing passion for science communication along with making income, or scientific illustrations, or SciArt?
Wow. This is also a difficult question for me to answer. I can't personally advise on what you should think about, but I would say that science communication opportunities work-wise are more. So if you are somebody who can make videos or can do writing, there is a better chance of finding gigs and jobs both. Particularly video and motion graphics is also something that's coming up. So more than an illustrator, it's like you find static images or video shots and stuff like that. At the moment, that's the rage, but it may or may not be, in 10 years, because the form of media will continue to evolve. But I think if you are identify as a science communicator more than a visualizer, I think that's the right space to be in. But it also, I mean, income wise, but in terms of your practice, I mean, that's a decision that you have to make.
Well, next question we have: how does color theory in scientific art affect perception, trust, and recall of information?
Oh, wow. That's such a specific question. I mean, color theory does make a lot of sense in trying to decide when you're doing something that's um, very specific. Like if you're doing, say, again, going back to the same example, if you're making diagrams for a textbook, if you're making a graphical abstract, in those kind of things, color theory is very important because you know what is the right thing to highlight, what should be the foreground, midground, hindground, so you can create layers of information. You can highlight things, you can connect things. I mean, not just color theory, all kinds of gestalt principles and a scale, negative space. All of these, design rules are important in creating visuals like that. And But when you're doing something more in a more organic space, like if I'm making a zine, I may or may not pay attention to these graphic design rules, because it's a more creative space. I can decide if I want to use these restrictions or not. And I mean, of course, theoretically, we understand that Gestalt principles and color theory both affect attention, recall, and all of that. So, this is true not just for scientific content, it's true for any kind of content that one sees. Like, for example, you may find certain book covers or certain movie posters more memorable than others. You may find certain shop signages more memorable than others. So it's all got to do with either color or any of the other design theory principles. But it's good that you are aware of it. I would definitely highly recommend that you whoever is interested in making science visualizations familiarize themselves with graphic design theories um, to improve and enhance their work. Yeah.
So next question is that how does the use of bright, design heavy colors affect perceptions of scientific rigor versus accessibility?
Right. I mean, this is a good question because again, it comes down to the audience. So when, let's say, if you're making something for a textbook or a scientific paper, the audience is going to be students or scientific peers. So we have certain, how do I say, like, we know that okay, we represent proteins in this way, we proteins receptors in a particular shape, and so there are these notations that are already used as a practice in this field or for that kind of subject. We represent DNA a certain way, so it is a good idea to sort of stay close to that representation, because then people can connect content from something that they have experienced previously to what they are experiencing now. But when you are doing something, let's say, which is for a visual for a brand that sells DNA detecting dye or something like that, then you can play with bold colors and all things like that. And so you have to decide your use of colors based on, again, the context and audience, which is something that I brought up earlier as well. So same logic holds true. If you use a lot of bold colors in textbook illustration, you might end up creating confusion because we don't know what really we should be looking at. So you have to use some foregrounding, mid-grounding, and hindgrounding colors. Even in color theory, there is a thing that we use only 10% of our composition has an accent color, when we are doing some clear messaging, which is a rule that must be broken, but it has to be contextual, intentful, and for a reason. Yeah.
Yes. So last question which we have on
Hmm.
our YouTube is that given art and diagrams is such an integral part of scientific research, what's your thought about this being taught as a small extracurricular course in university?
Sorry, like art of diagramming, you mean?
Yes, ma'am. Art.
Art or diagramming? Because I think of those two things as a very different thing. I'm not sure
Well,
if.
both the things are, I feel, the integral part of scientific research.
Right.
So if both the things can be clubbed into one and taught as a small
Hmm.
extracurricular course in university, what's your take about it?
I mean, I don't know about. I mean, I definitely think that all science courses, I mean, science degrees should have humanities and art aspect to them. But just having a small course dedicated to art or diagramming, I'm not sure I see that vision. But it can definitely be a workshop, if anything. And the other thing is that if you are reading the usual biology textbooks or even chemistry textbooks, I imagine you are practicing diagramming in your own way. I mean, so not everything has to be taught by a course. You learn things by practice as well. So if you are picking up things from the textbooks or other kinds of reading materials that you are learning materials that you're looking at, then you are like, maybe not so actively, but you are picking up diagramming skills. And if you want to learn more about it personally, then of course you are welcome to learn about it personally. I'm not super convinced that it needs a special course. Definitely, scientists need humanities course. That I'm very convinced of. Yeah. I can't hear you, Samila.
So this is my personal question. And since you are in the field of science illustration, so ma'am, what is your favorite science illustration and why it is your favorite?
Uh, I mean, I can't say I have one favorite science illustration. I have a lot of people whose work I really like. Um, and depending on days, I might be obsessed with a different one. But I can talk about one of the first ones that I was like really interested in, and I mean, I still appreciate it. It's so there is this natural history illustrator called Maria Sibylla Marian. I mean, she's from a different century. She's not a contemporary artist, And I think her work was one of the few ones that, when you're a beginner is like, and you're looking up things online, that's the first one I kind of came across. And I really like her work because she did something which was fundamentally very interesting, which was that she compressed time on an image. So usually when people used to make observational drawings of whatever specimen, it would be like, here, I see this flower and this bud, let me put it together. What she did was that she compressed time across at least few weeks. So she was trying to show insect life cycle. And so she would show egg, caterpillar, and cocoon, and maybe there were multiple stages of caterpillars and the adult on the same drawing with the flower or the plant in question. So why that is interesting is because she now is showing essentially what will now be called a life cycle. So it was essentially a life cycle diagram, but presented as if it's a botanical plate. And there was also a lot of criticism for that, for in her time for it, but I think it was revolutionary in that sense. And there is another image that I really like. It's called Duria Antiqua, or I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, which is the first paleo art kind of image where um, this artist whose name eludes me at the moment, who looked at the fossils that Mary Anning was collecting in Lime Beach, and then we understood what kind of dinosaurs existed at that time, and so he created a composition which showed how those dinosaurs would have interacted with each other and other life forms that were present at that time. So for me, it's really interesting because that's also the kind of like a hypothesis building and a speculation exercise where you are kind of imagining what would have happened based on the very limited fossil data that you have. Um, and I find using images as an exercise to build hypotheses very interesting. So that's also something that I really am fond of.
So I'm really thank you, ma'am, for giving your time, and thank you for taking up these questions.
Welcome.
So over to you, Angel.
Can't hear you, Kinjal.
Still, you're on mute.
Yes, so sorry. So this was the end of our audience question and answer session. But before we wrap up, I request all the audiences to fill up the feedback forms. Your feedback and suggestions help us to make the sessions more relevant and engaging, and also, of course, enables you to get an e-certificate. So with that, let us move on to the vote of thanks. So on the behalf of all the organizing team and our attendees, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Ipsa Jain for such an active, thought provoking, and insightful session today. Ma'am, the clarity and the passion with what you addressed every topic, that was truly inspiring. Thank you so much for generously sharing your time and expertise with us. A sincere thank you to all our wonderful audience for an active participation, and the organizing team for working behind the scenes tirelessly to make that this session possible. And we look forward to make more such enlightening engagements as well as collaborations with us in future. Once again, thank you, Dr. Ipsa Jain. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. This is Kinjal signing off on behalf of SciComm Synapse and KalaTatva. Thank you once again and have a wonderful day.